Why shouldn't you own multiple investment properties in a single LLC or in your revocable living trust? So the key word here for why you shouldn't is liability. So when you own more than one property in a single LLC, what happens is if there's a dispute related to any one of those properties, it makes it so that all of the properties are subject to a possible judgment or settlement related to that dispute. The best sort of analogy for this is the old putting all your eggs in one basket, right? It's like you have this one basket or you have this one box. And if we put one property in the box, and that property, let's say, is a rental property, so it collects rental income, and that rental income goes into that bank account associated with that property. So you have this one property that you put in the box. This property is owned by an LLC, and you do that. The whole purpose of setting up this LLC is so that property is separate from you for liability purposes. This limited liability company that you set up, assuming it was done properly, and you should have an operating agreement, assuming all that was done properly, it is separated from you, meaning if something happens and there's some type of dispute, your personal assets aren't at risk or shouldn't be at risk. So you have this one property in the box. All right, so let's say there's a dispute over this one property owned by an LLC in the box. Well, in the event of a dispute like that, only that one property and the bank account associated with that property or anything else that that LLC may own, that single LLC that's owning that one property, is subject to that dispute. Nothing else. It's in its nice box all by itself. Well, now let's say you are buying multiple properties and you're buying all of them under that same LLC. So you have LLCA, and LLCA now, instead of owning one property, owns 6 properties. So now what you've done by lumping all those properties into one box, right? Everything's together under this one LLC. You've now made it so that if there's a dispute or an issue with any one of those 6 properties, the attorney who's fighting you in this dispute can go after all 6 properties and all 6 bank accounts associated with the properties and anything else that is owned by that LLC. So that's why a much better method is to look at potentially separating your rentals into one LLC per rental. Or if that seems a little overwhelming for you, depending on how many properties you have, at least consider limiting the amount of properties you have owned by a single LLC. So limit it to maybe 2 or 3. Maybe there's a middle road for you. Maybe you feel that the type of rentals they aren't that risky. And just on that briefly, there's definitely different risk involved with different type of rentals. If you have a single family dwelling that you're renting to your Aunt Mary, who's going to be in it for 20 more years, there's probably not a ton of risk that Aunt Mary is going to sue you. However, you have an Airbnb or some other type of short-term rental where you're constantly having people coming and going and you can't really monitor who's in there as well as you like. Well, there's going to be a lot of liability associated with that type of a property. So you may want to consider that. You may want to make sure that short-term rentals, they all have their own LLC, where if you have a couple of other properties rented by family or close friends and they're not going to be rented by anyone else for a long time, well, maybe you group all those together in an LLC. Something to consider, but you at least want to look at separating them out somehow so that you're not putting all the eggs, all the properties in one basket for liability. Now, the same applies to when you have a revocable living trust. If you have a trust and you own rental property, and I see this all the time where people come to me and they have rental property that's in their name only, right? Rather than transferring it to an LLC. Sometimes they'll get advice from attorneys to just go ahead and put it in your trust, right? Why not? You're forming this trust. The trust is so all your assets can avoid probate. So let's put all your assets in the trust. Very, very bad idea. The same sort of concept. Whatever is in your revocable trust, and your revocable trust is its own little box here, right? So whatever's in that box gets lumped together if there's ever a dispute. So what you're doing when you put a rental directly into your trust, rather than putting it in an LLC first and having that LLC assigned to your trust to avoid probate, if you put it directly into the trust, what's happening is it's lumped with every other asset owned by your trust. So if there's a dispute with that rental, the attorney who's on the front line of that dispute can come after everything owned by your trust, your personal bank accounts if they're in there. Some people put vehicles in trust. If you have brokerage accounts in trust, anything that's in that trust is potentially subject to that dispute, along with any other properties that might be in the trust, usually with the exception of your homestead. But regardless, there's going to be a lot of other assets that you now subjected to a dispute because you're owning rentals or investments directly under your revocable living trust. So what's the fix for this? Rather than owning these rentals directly under your trust, you should own each rental in its own LLC, or like I said before, if you want to group a few together because there's not a bunch of liability there, fine. But make sure you put them in an LLC first. That LLC can be assigned to your trust, or if you open or start the LLC after the trust was formed, you can start off right from the get-go with your trust as the owner of the LLC rather than you individually. In this way, the properties can go into the LLC and get liability protection from the LLC. But if the LLC is either owned by your trust or you do a business assignment of the membership interest to the LLC to your trust, then it also gets the probate avoidance that goes along with your revocable trust, and which was the reason you would have gotten the revocable trust in the first place. All right, so I hope this is helpful. I wanted to put a video out on this because I see it a lot. If there's any other questions about how to properly own investment properties with or without a trust and the use of LLCs and investment properties, please don't hesitate to contact our office. If you're in Florida, we are atCAUSE Law Office, the non-stuffy attorneys, and the link is in my bio.